Tonight, I'm going to share 3 true stories that don't fade when the sun comes up. They're the kind of stories that follow you home, that slip into your thoughts when you're alone in the dark. Some say they're nothing but coincidences, others swear every word is real. I'll let you decide for yourself. So turn down the lights, take a breath, and remember, some things don't care if you believe in them. They're already here. It was the middle of July when Tom, Grace, and Leo decided to escape the noise of the city. They'd heard about a secluded lake deep in the woods, a place so far off the map that cell service vanished miles before you arrived. The drive took most of the day, winding along narrow roads that grew rougher the deeper they went. By the time they pulled up to the clearing, the sun was sinking behind the trees, their shadows stretching long and thin over the grass. The lake itself was still, the water so black it looked like a hole torn into the earth. Insects droned in the humid air. They set up their tents just a few steps from the shoreline. Grace was the first to comment on the smell, an undercurrent of rot beneath the usual dampness of the forest. Leo brushed it off as swampy muck. When they unpacked their supplies, Tom noticed something odd, an old weathered sign nailed to a tree. The paint was faded, but if you squinted, you could still make out the words, "Do not camp here, no rescue beyond this point." He felt a chill despite the heat, and for a moment he thought about suggesting they turn back, but Grace laughed and called him dramatic. Leo agreed, saying people probably just put up weird signs to scare off trespassers. They built a fire as darkness settled in. The lake swallowed all light, refusing to reflect even the glow of the flames. When Tom walked down to the water's edge to rinse a pan, he thought he saw something move beneath the surface. Just a ripple, he told himself. Maybe a fish. But as he turned to go back, he caught the smell again, stronger this time, as if something old and wet were watching from the trees. The night came down heavy, pressing against the thin walls of their tents. The forest was so quiet it felt like holding your breath underwater. Even the insects had gone still. Tom lay awake, listening. He tried to convince himself it was just nerves, that the sign was nothing but a prank. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw that ripple in the lake, the way it had spread in a perfect circle, as if something large had risen just out of sight. Sometime after midnight, he heard it. A soft, deliberate knock on the canvas. Once, then again, and he held his breath. Another knock, slower this time, brushing the fabric near his head. He whispered Grace's name, but her tent stayed silent. Leo was 2 tents over. No one answered. The knocks moved along the wall, pausing at the zipper. The air inside the tent turned cold, cold enough that he could see his breath. He forced himself to sit up. His hands shook as he reached for the flashlight, and the knocking stopped. Tom listened so hard it made his ears ache. He thought he heard something dripping outside, slow and thick. When he finally unzipped the flap and shone the light, there was nothing. Just the trees standing in rows like witnesses, and the lake flat and black, but the ground was wet. Water pooled around the tent stakes, even though it hadn't rained. He followed the puddles with his light. They led away from his tent in a line of dark, glistening footprints. They weren't shaped like boots. They were long, narrow, almost human, but with too many toes. At dawn, the lake looked unchanged. Mist clung to the surface in low, rolling banks that shifted when you tried to focus on them. Tom hadn't slept at all. He waited until the sky began to lighten before unzipping his tent again. Grace's was still closed, but Leo's flap hung open, fabric rippling in the breeze. He called out. No answer. He stepped over to Leo's tent and looked inside. The sleeping bag was empty, laid out neatly as if no one had ever been there. His boots were gone, his backpack missing. Grace emerged from her tent, rubbing her eyes. She asked where Leo had gone. Tom pointed to the footprints, now dried into crusted mud, ending halfway between the tents and the lake. They spent the morning searching the shoreline, calling his name until their voices went hoarse. No sign, no answer. When the sun climbed higher, Tom walked into the trees to see if Leo had wandered off. That was when he noticed the handprint. It was pressed high on the trunk of a birch tree about 7 feet up. The fingers were splayed wide, longer than any person's hand. Even after years, he can remember how it looked. Wet, black, as if something had climbed out of the lake, pausing to brace itself before vanishing into the forest. They called the ranger station. A search team came that afternoon. Dogs sniffed the trail but lost the scent by the water's edge. No trace of Leo was ever found. When Tom closed his eyes, he kept seeing the ripple in the lake, widening in perfect silence. It was late August when Hannah and Mark packed up their car and set out for the coast. They had been saving for this trip all summer, one last escape before the cold set in. The highway wound through farmland and pine forests, long stretches without another car in sight. The day was hot enough that the asphalt shimmered. Every so often they passed an abandoned farmhouse or a rusted sign half swallowed by weeds. It was near one of those signs that they saw him, a man standing by the roadside, thumb out, a battered canvas pack slung over one shoulder. He wore jeans and a dark jacket despite the heat. He didn't look up as they approached. Hannah glanced at Mark. "We can't just leave him out here." Mark hesitated, then pulled over. The man climbed into the back seat without a word. Up close, he smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic. His face was pale, eyes shadowed under the brim of his hat. For a few miles, nobody spoke. The hum of the tires filled the silence. Then, in a voice so soft it barely carried over the engine, the man asked, "Do you believe in ghosts?" Neither of them answered right away. Mark cleared his throat, tried to laugh it off. The man didn't move, didn't smile. He just repeated the question a little louder. "Do you believe in ghosts?" They left the gas station in silence. The highway had emptied completely, no headlights behind or ahead. Hannah tried to tell herself they were just tired, that they'd imagined the way he vanished, but she kept checking the rearview mirror. Every time her heart lurched. At first it was nothing, just darkness pooling in the back seat. Then as they rounded a curve, she saw it again, his face reflected in the glass, pale and blurred as if underwater. His eyes fixed on hers, unblinking. She gasped and turned around. The seat was empty. Mark gripped the wheel tighter. He didn't look back. "Don't," he whispered. "Don't look again." They drove until dawn, too afraid to stop. When they finally reached the coast, Hannah stepped out and felt the ocean wind against her face. She thought maybe it was over, but later, as they unloaded their bags, she glanced at the back window one last time. A handprint had appeared in the condensation, long-fingered, pressed flat against the glass from the inside. The pool had been closed for years, hidden behind a rusted chain-link fence and a row of overgrown hedges. In daylight it looked harmless, just cracked tiles and stagnant rainwater. But that night, with the moon hidden behind clouds, it felt different. A group of 4 teenagers climbed the fence one by one. Their laughter was too loud, forced, as if none of them wanted to admit they were scared. Mason was the first who suggested dare. He pointed to the deep end, where the water was blacker than the rest. "Dive to the bottom," he said. "Touch the drain." No one moved. The air smelled sour, like mildew and something older, something that had been sealed away. Finally, Aaron muttered that he'd do it. He kicked off his shoes and stepped to the edge. The surface barely rippled as he slipped in. The water closed over his head without a sound. The others waited, counting the seconds under their breath. 10, 15, 20. Mason leaned over the edge. He could see Aaron's shape sinking slowly, arms drifting out as if reaching for something far below. 30 seconds passed. 40. Mason called Aaron's name, his voice echoing against the cracked walls. No answer. Then Aaron's head broke the surface with a ragged gasp. He clung to the ledge, eyes wide, water streaming from his hair. "Did you touch it?" someone asked. Aaron didn't speak. He stared past them into the darkness at the center of the pool. Mason felt something shift under his feet, a slow vibration as if the water itself was breathing. "What did you see down there?" he asked. Aaron's voice came out in a whisper. It was open." The others looked at each other. "What was open?" Aaron didn't blink. "The drain." Mason shone a flashlight across the surface. For an instant he thought he saw a pale shape hovering just below, a face turned upward, hair waving in the current. He stepped back so fast he nearly slipped. The water stilled. The shape was gone. Aaron hauled himself out and stood shivering, arms wrapped tight around his chest. "I felt it," he said. "It was pulling me down." And he wouldn't say another word. They left the pool in silence, climbing back over the fence without looking behind them. Aaron wouldn't talk about what had happened. Even when Mason tried to joke it off, he just stared at the ground, his hands trembling. That night, Aaron called Mason 3 times before dawn. Each time he whispered the same thing: "It's still open." The next summer, Mason drove past the old pool. Weeds had grown taller than the fence, but when he parked and peered through the gaps, he saw that the water hadn't evaporated. It looked deeper, darker. Sometimes late at night, he remembers the way Aaron's eyes looked when he came up gasping for air, like he'd seen something that hadn't let him go. Years later, Aaron moved away, trying to forget, but every few months Mason gets a call. No greeting, just Aaron's voice, soft and flat. "I see it when I close my eyes." And then the line goes dead. Maybe you think these are only stories, campfire tales passed along to keep us awake at night. But every summer someone disappears. A swimmer who never surfaces, a hiker who leaves no trail, a face that doesn't belong watching from the corner of a mirror. Maybe there are places that remember us long after we leave. Maybe some doors once opened never really close. If you've ever seen something you couldn't explain, something that still visits you in your dreams, you're not alone. Some stories don't end. They just wait, patient and silent, for someone else to listen.